For centuries, artists have painted Jesus with long brown hair, a neatly trimmed beard, bright skin, and striking blue eyes. It's one of the most recognizable faces in history. But here's the surprising question. What if none of those images are historically accurate? The Bible never tells us what Jesus looked like. There are no contemporary portraits, no Roman descriptions, no eyewitness sketches. So, after 2,000 years, can we actually reconstruct the face of Jesus? Today, we'll separate tradition from history and discover what modern scholarship suggests the historical Jesus may really have looked like. Jesus of Nazareth is one of the most influential people who ever lived. His image appears in churches, museums, books, and films across the world. Yet despite his enormous impact on history, the earliest Christian writings remain almost completely silent about his physical appearance. Unlike many famous rulers of the ancient world, Jesus left behind no statues, no official portraits, and no detailed written description of his face. This has led to countless artistic interpretations over the centuries. But historians ask a different question. Instead of asking what artists imagine, they ask what the historical evidence actually tells us. The first thing historians point out is that the New Testament never describes Jesus' height, eye color, hair color, or facial features. This omission may seem strange today, but it was not unusual in ancient biographies. The Gospel writers focused on his teachings and actions rather than his appearance. Because there are no first-century portraits of Jesus, researchers turn to archaeology, historical records, and the study of the people who lived in Judea during his lifetime. Jesus was born into a Jewish family in first-century Galilee. Most Jewish men of that period shared similar physical characteristics. Based on archaeological evidence and ancient human remains, historians believe Jesus likely had olive-toned skin, dark brown or black hair, and brown eyes. His face was probably weathered from years of working outdoors under the Middle Eastern sun. He also likely wore a full beard, which was common among Jewish men of the time. What about his hair? Many famous paintings show Jesus with long, flowing hair. However, this image may not reflect historical reality. The Apostle Paul, writing in the first letter to the Corinthians, remarked that long hair was generally considered unusual for men in his cultural context. While Paul's words were written years after Jesus' ministry and addressed a different community, many historians believe they make it less likely that Jesus wore extremely long hair as later European art often portrays him. Instead, his hair was probably short to medium in length, thick, and naturally curly or wavy. His clothing was almost certainly simple. The Gospels describe Jesus wearing ordinary garments typical of Jewish men in Roman Judea. A long tunic, a mantle or outer cloak, sandals, and perhaps a simple head covering when needed. Nothing suggests that his clothing would have made him stand out in a crowd. In fact, one detail from the Gospels points in the opposite direction. When Judas identified Jesus to the arresting soldiers with a kiss, it suggests Jesus looked much like the people around him. If his appearance had been especially unusual, such a sign may not have been necessary. In 2001, forensic artist Richard Neve created a facial reconstruction based on the skull of a first-century Jewish man from the region. The result was not intended to be a portrait of Jesus. Instead, it illustrated what a typical Jewish man from that time and place may have looked like. Most historians agree that this reconstruction is a more realistic historical reference than the familiar Renaissance paintings, which were influenced by European artistic traditions rather than archaeological evidence. This does not mean we know Jesus' exact face. No one does. But history allows us to make educated conclusions about the features he most likely shared with other Jewish men of first-century Galilee. So, what did Jesus really look like? The honest answer is that no surviving record tells us exactly. But history does offer valuable clues. Rather than the image popularized by centuries of Western art, the historical Jesus was most likely an ordinary Jewish man of his time. With dark hair, brown eyes, olive-toned skin, a beard, and simple clothing. Perhaps that is fitting. The earliest Christians preserved his words, his teachings, and his actions. They never seemed concerned with preserving his face. And maybe that tells us something important. Sometimes, history remembers what changed the world, instead of what the person who changed it looked like. In our next video, we'll explore another fascinating mystery. Where is the tomb of Jesus today?